So I know almost everybody here, but for those who I haven't yet met, I'm Nico Slate. I teach in the history department here at CMU. And I want to start by thanking many of the people in this room and some who can't be here with us, because this was an incredibly collaborative venture from the very beginning. You just heard from Amy Burkert, Vice Provost for Education. She and John Lahosky, the Dean of HNSS, were at the foundation of this semester from the beginning all the way through. And I'd like to thank both of you very much. I'd also like to thank the Office for International Education, Linda Gentili and Chris Manan in particular, who were in this from the beginning all the way through. And Shields Demansky and all our friends at University Advancement and in the President's Office were absolutely vital to making this possible. My own department head, Carolyn Acker, the history department made this semester possible, and I'd like to thank Carolyn and the Department of History as well, and all of you who helped in many different ways. It's meant a lot to us to have your support, and we see this event today as a chance to say thank you, to share our experiences, and also to continue to get your help, because we don't see this as a polished, perfect product. It is, as Amy called it, an experiment, one that we hope to do again, but that we certainly are actively tweaking and changing and reimagining, and so we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for your questions, your ideas, your suggestions. So here's how it's going to work. We're going to all introduce ourselves very briefly, and why don't we do that first, right off the bat? Yeah.
I'm Emily Mohn-Slate, and I teach writing in the English department here at Carnegie Mellon.
Hi, I'm Wesley Hall. I am a senior majoring in global studies and Japanese.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcy Held. I'm also a senior and I'm a global studies student and I also study photography.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Hernandez and I'm a global studies and professional writing double major.
My name is Daniel. I'm a senior studying international relations and politics.
Wonderful. Emily and I are going to give you a very brief overview of the semester with images, and then the students will share their experiences, and then we'll open the floor for questions and suggestions. Just one last announcement, actually. I know a lot of the students in the room are students in the history department, either history, global studies, or EHPP. I just wanted to remind you, this Thursday morning there's a welcome back breakfast, which I'm coming to. Free food, I do not pass over. So I hope to see a lot of you there, 8:30 to 10 in the Dean's Conference, Dean's Conference Room. All right. In the summer of 1893, we didn't go to India, no. In the summer of 1893, a young Indian lawyer was thrown off a train in South Africa. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi might have been nothing but a mediocre lawyer if he had not been thrown off that train. In fact, being thrown off that train was vital to the path that eventually led him to become the Gandhi that we know. I've talked about Gandhi and his experience on that train and his life with many of my students. I've had incredible conversations in this building about Gandhi. But I had never before had anything like the conversation I had here at Gandhi's ashram with these students. There was something very different about talking about Gandhi and his history and his life at the ashram itself. Just imagine, here we are sitting together in a small room at the ashram talking about Gandhi's autobiography, when suddenly one of the students did something very Gandhian. Said, wait a minute, we shouldn't just have this as a conversation. Why can't we put this to practice? And very quickly, the focus turned to two young men that had been helping us throughout our time living at the ashram, Suraj and Akash. And Suraj and Akash are both from poor families. Neither of them had been able to finish high school, and they were incredibly helpful to us. They brought us the hot water that we used to bathe with. They cleaned our rooms. They brought us fruit. They took us to afternoon tea. They were our friends and also vital support throughout our time there. And we started to talk about, well, what could we do for them? And at first, as the faculty member, my point was to raise the issue of privilege and to show that, in fact, it would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for us to actually do anything to help these young men. But CMU students, one of my favorite things about CMU students is they don't like to be told they can't do something. So here I am trying to make the point about how hard it would be to actually help these two young men when the students kept pushing back, and we ended up realizing that actually we could pool a small amount of money and send both of these young men to college. And not only that, but the local partner we were working with, a partner I'll tell you about in just a minute, could mentor them to help in the difficult transition back into the school system. This is Akash with a bicycle that we were able to buy for him on his way to the headquarters of the NGO in order to meet with his mentor. Akash is now a student at a local engineering college. Suraj is studying industrial processes. They're both being mentored by incredible, incredible men who work for the local foundation. And they're in constant almost too constant feedback with us through that most powerful of all tools, right? Facebook. So, okay, what's the point of all this? Well, for me, at the very foundation, this story makes clear that CMU students can do good things in the world. What I hope is that it also shows that in doing good things in the world, they learn more than they would have if we had had that conversation about Gandhi just here in a classroom. And that's a big question for me. It's one of the questions I hope we can talk about. What are the learning outcomes of this kind of experience? My hypothesis is that the kind of integrated learning that we did on the semester, bringing academic classroom types of activities in conversation with service, can actually maximize the learning for everybody involved. It's something that many of you in the room, actually, I see lots of people here that have been doing this for a long time. I think we're all together trying to show how we can make this kind of service learning experience as maximally useful as we possibly could. Now, our semester didn't start in Warda. It actually started at the Doha campus in Qatar, and so I'm going to pass it on to Emily to talk a bit about that.
So as Nico said, we started the semester in Doha, Qatar, where we all met. It was kind of the ideal meeting point where we were able to use the resources of the university there and to be a part of that community for our first 3 weeks of the semester. The students began their 4 semester-long courses in Doha, India and the World, which was worth 9 units, Sustainable Social Change, which is also a 9-unit course, Leadership and the Personal Narrative, which was 9 units, and then a research seminar, which was 18 units, and also continued for the entire semester. We had lectures that included CMUQ students and small class discussions of our readings. Students began literature reviews for their research projects and engaged in Hindi language study through Rosetta Stone. They also connected to CMUQ students by living in the dorms and engaging in various social and cultural activities while we were there. As a group, we visited a variety of local sites, including the souk, the Qatar Cultural Village, a few museums, and just generally getting to be in a very different part of the world than any of us had ever been in. And it was particularly meaningful because we felt this connection right away with being within the Carnegie Mellon community in a different part of the world. It was the first time there for all of us except for Nico, who had taught there once. Our service work there entailed leading tutoring sessions with migrant workers who worked at the Georgetown University campus in Education City. This is a picture of one of the tutoring groups on our last day. We taught computer basics and used Rosetta Stone software, as well as conversation, to teach English. Many of the workers originally came from South Asia, and so it was also kind of an entree to learning about South Asia, through learning about their lives, what had brought them there. And so it ended up being a really positive experience overall.
So from Doha, we flew to almost the exact geographic heart of India, outside the city of Nagpur, in an area called Warda. Warda is the site of Gandhi's last ashram, and it was that brought us there. We lived at the ashram's guest quarters. This is one of the rooms that Emily and I and the students lived in. It also doubled as our classroom. We would push the beds to the side and sit in a circle in order to talk about our readings, talk about the papers that we had assigned, and also crucially talk about how we were going to connect those readings and papers to the service work that we were doing. In Warda, our service work was based on an incredible partnership with a large rural development foundation, the Kamalnayan Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation. Now, the Bajaj family has long and deep ties to Warda and to Gandhi. This is Gandhi ji walking with Kamalnayan Bajaj. Our own ties were more recent and started with a connection between this man, Kushagra Bajaj, a Tepper alum, and former President Cohen. Former President Cohen was invited to Warda in 2012. This is probably my favorite picture of him. And forgive me, but I couldn't pass this up. He's holding a papaya, but the real fruit of his trip there, sorry, I apologize. I apologize. The real fruit of his trip there were the relationships that Carnegie Mellon and the Bajaj Foundation have been able to forge, our semester being one of those. Okay, what did we do? Well, the Bajaj Foundation took us all around to see all the different kinds of rural development they were doing. So we visited fields, we talked with farmers, we participated in a lot of really interesting forms of village community engagement. This is something called a participatory rural appraisal, where the Bajaj Foundation goes into a new village and asks the villagers what they already know. So rather than coming in as experts from the outside and saying, here's what we're going to teach you, the Bajaj Foundation goes in and first says, okay, what do you already know? What can we learn from you? And the students participated in this rural appraisal. This is, I think, a cost-benefit analysis of different kinds of crops, trying to get a sense for what the farmers already know about why they grow different things. We had fun. We learned how to cook. Some of us, anyway. This was absolutely disastrous for me. I learned I can make really good chapati so long as really good means amoeba-shaped. I wasn't good with the circles. Dan, you're doing a good job actually there.
Pretty good.
Yeah, you're doing a good job. I'm impressed. This is Hari Bhai Mori, who's become a good friend. He's the director of the Bajaj Foundation and an expert chapati maker himself. Most of our service work was teaching, and most of it was working with women's collaboratives. The Bajaj Foundation has about 600 women's collaboratives that serve a variety of different roles in villages throughout the area. We worked with a small group of the collaboratives and then also with leaders from many of them. A lot of our work was focused on basic computer training and also English, business, and leadership skills. And in that training, we were actually joined by a group of students from CMU-Q. And one of my favorite things about the semester is that there were many ways we were connected to the Doha campus. One of the students who was with us all the way through the semester, Mariam, right here, is from CMU-Q. She's now graduated, but she was with us all the way through. But for about 10 days during their spring break, we had a group of 6 other CMU-Q students who came to Warda to work with us. They brought with them some laptops that we were able to donate to these women's collaboratives, and they also brought a tremendous amount of energy. And so suddenly we had this large team that could work with the women in all sorts of ways. This is a CMU-Q student and one of our students from the Pittsburgh campus working together in these small groups with leaders of women's collaboratives to teach them basic computer skills and also English. Another CMU-Q student. One of my favorite things about this is that very quickly the women's leaders took ownership of the learning process and started to teach each other. My favorite moment is when we were able to have one of these small circles Skype another small circle, within the same room. So the learning process was incredibly fast and dynamic and really brought us all together. We also had the help of an incredible CMU alum, a former student of mine, Mansi Patel, who graduated from CIT a few years ago, is from this part of India and so speaks Marathi, the local language. Mansi served as our translator. Here she is here. As well as just an incredibly dynamic presence throughout the semester. It was CMU at its best. We had students from Pittsburgh, students from Doha, we had alums all working together in partnership with this foundation that is directed by a CMU alum, working with people from throughout the region. Now, our goal is to keep those relationships going, not just through hopefully having semesters in the future, which is still an ongoing question, we hope to, but also through something that actually all of the students helped build while we were there, something that has come to be called the Bajaj Rural Development Lab. The idea is kind of like the MIT Poverty Action Lab to serve as a hub of connections between the CMU community and the good work that the Bajaj Foundation is doing in Warda. And I'll just mention 3 ongoing projects. Right now there's 2 teams of chemical engineering students, seniors here in CMU Pittsburgh, that are working with the Bajaj Foundation. One of them helping test the organic fertilizer that the Bajaj Foundation helps farmers to build. The other one working on the best way to trap gases from cow manure and use them to create clean burning cooking fuel. My favorite part of this is both projects involve getting large amounts of cow dung onto the CMU campus. So that's happening right now. The other connection is with the Heinz Negotiation Academy for Women. We're hoping to bring some folks from that academy to work with the women's collaboratives in Warda. The goal here is to maximize the relationships between CMU and the Bajaj Foundation on many different axes, so that ultimately people at CMU, students, faculty, researchers, can benefit from what's being done in Warda, and vice versa. The Bajaj Foundation can benefit from all of us. Okay, from Warda, which is right around here, we flew down to Chennai in the south in order to give the students a very different experience of India.
Okay, so Chennai is one of India's largest cities, and it offers a range of attractions. It's a big city which gave the students a chance to experience both rural and urban India, which I think was a positive thing overall. The students very quickly became masters of traveling by auto rickshaw, which are these black and yellow contraptions here. And they make for a very exciting ride if you've never been in one before. We rented a small B&B called Franji House, so the students could all stay together. This is actually the first floor living room, common area, where we held our classes while in Chennai. Our 4 courses continued with readings and assignments while in Chennai. Students focused especially on the on-the-ground aspect of their research project at this point as we were nearing the end of the semester. So a lot of them were conducting interviews and going to cultural events and trying to talk to people in the community to learn more about their topics on the ground. After settling into Chennai for about a week, we traveled southwest to southern Tamil Nadu to run a week-long leadership camp for underprivileged middle school students. And this was through an NGO called Visions Global Empowerment. The Visions Camp combined a variety of games and activities with lessons that our students designed and taught. The best part of the camp by far, I think the students will agree, were the relationships that were forged. The students were able to make an impact in the lives of these students very quickly. And this relationship is continuing. I have to give a little plug with 2 of our students, Alexandria Hernandez, who's here today, and another student, Marie Aviles, who are just beginning a CMU chapter of Visions here on our campus. The camp participants were divided into various groups, and each came up with a unique name and cheer. So this is a picture of Mariam, one of our students, and Surya, who was one of the best artists by far in the group. And they're proudly displaying their sign for the Power Stars group. We then returned to Chennai, where our service work focused on a partnership with an innovative after-school program offering mentoring and workshops for underprivileged high school students who are aiming to go to college. And this organization is called the Avanti Fellows Program. We connected with the Avanti students right away and had many meaningful exchanges with them about our lives and our interests. Here's Daniel talking with a group of students right here. Our students had the opportunity to design and teach workshops based on their own unique areas of interest. So this was something that was very exciting for Nico and I to see, was that we were able to pass over the reins by this point in the semester and to let these students shine in terms of the teaching skills that they had honed through their time in Warda with the Bajaj work, and to also just see them teaching and talking about their passions beyond social change. So we had lessons on poetry, environmental science, social entrepreneurship, public speaking, and photography, just a few. The Avanti students are all striving to enter good colleges in India, and so they were also really curious to know what the college experience is like for CMU students in Pittsburgh and in Doha. And so we also brought this into the conversation as well. We tried to create opportunities for the students to talk about their lives and their dreams, and to share with their peers while gaining confidence in the process.
So from Chennai, we then flew all the way up to New Delhi for the last week of the semester, which was an opportunity for us to reflect, but also to experience a very different kind of India as well. India is such a diverse place. We wanted students to have a range of experiences, so we visited a lot of sites in Delhi, including the Jama Masjid, the Lotus Temple, and then ended that week with a visit to the Taj Mahal in Agra. So it's kind of a truism that college professors learn just as much from the classes as the students do. And I often tell my students that they'll learn as much from each other as they will from me, and I mean that very sincerely. But I had never before had the same kind of experience we had, and Emily, you said it well earlier, where the students really took ownership of the semester and became no longer just students, but really co-directors, co-leaders, co-innovators of the semester. And so we're going to shut up now and let them tell you about their experiences. We hadn't arranged an order. Who wants to start? You want to start?
Yeah,
Okay, Marcy.
I have a thought right now.
Okay, great. Let me move this over here for you.
I don't know, Nico and Emily did a great job just of explaining everything. And just for me personally, I think probably, I don't know, like you say we took ownership, and I guess we did, but just getting to meet and work with all the people that we got to meet and work with sort of made that an easy thing to do. Like, we were around inspiring people all the time that were doing great things, and, you know, the students, the Bajaj staff, everyone. So just getting to work with them, I think, really is what fostered a lot of the results that we talked about today. I don't know, I guess my favorite part was probably tutoring with the students, which is sort of surprising for me because I didn't know. It's always hard for me, I guess, you know, just like to lead a group, or even if it's kids that are younger than me. But they were all amazing, and that was probably one of my favorite parts of the whole trip.
Great.
So.
Lexi, you want to go?
Sure. I think that something that I grappled with throughout the entire semester was this notion of like being enough. So I think that I personally came into the semester worried that, you know, I didn't know enough. You know, Professor Slate always just promised we're going to change the world. And I thought, wow, you know, like, am I good enough or smart enough to, you know, help do that? And kind of seeing growth amongst myself and amongst my fellow students, and then also seeing students grapple with that same thing in India. So like one of my groups at the Visions Camp was called the Tiger Group. And I loved them dearly. And one of them was elected home minister, and she was terrified and started to cry. And one of the things that she said to our translator, who then told me, was that she didn't think she was smart enough. And I remember really empathizing and feeling like I could understand where she was coming from. And so me and Tahira Green, who was my co-leader, kind of held her hand throughout the process and helped her embrace the role. So I think that's just one example of the way in which, you know, the semester kind of builds confidence for ourselves, but also for the people we're helping, which is just a very powerful notion.
Sure. I'm going to hop on a text that we were assigned to read. So we had a book that we had to read called We Make the Road by Walking. And that phrase has really stuck with me since that trip. And I think the biggest part about the semester was that everyone was okay with making mistakes. Initially, we were concerned about impact and about whether we were doing enough, but then the mistakes became okay and they became a learning experience. And Nico and Emily were, at first we were kind of confused at why they were giving us so much ownership and letting us make so many mistakes, but in reality, the we part was a really big part of the semester, that we were making these mistakes, but we were also improving. And then another thing that really struck out to me from the semester was so much of your academic life is spent kind of in the armchair and withdrawn, and you're talking about philosophy, you're talking about change, and it gets tough to go outside that door, but when you're sitting in Gandhi's ashram debating, Sen, who's an eminent Indian philosopher, kind of the contemporary of John Rawls, you're talking about social justice, and then you get to go out into community and actually try to embody that social justice. That's an incredibly empowering experience. And I think that while in the moment, what we were doing felt small or local, looking back on that road that we had traveled, we had gone pretty far, we had stumbled, but the distance was pretty great.
Great.
For me, I think when I first agreed to do the semester, I talked to a lot of people about what programs like this were like. And while I was really excited and I completely believed in Nico and Emily's ability to make it into something special, I couldn't help but be a little bit afraid of what other people had told me. And what I had learned from other people was that a lot of people who've done this at other universities either got the impression that they spent a lot of time acting without understanding or understanding without acting. And I really didn't want to come back in either space. And the really cool thing about this experience was that we didn't do that. We spent a lot of time researching where we were, the histories, the people, the different groups, how they were getting along. We looked at, all of the most beautiful things about the places that we were. We looked at all of the most difficult things about the places that we were. And we picked something and we came up with an action plan for how to make that thing better. But we didn't do that by ourselves. The really cool thing about every single place that we went was that we had partners and we had people that we were collaborating with. When we were in Warda with the Bajaj Foundation, Hari Baimori gave a beautiful presentation where he essentially told us that in whatever we tried to do, we were doomed if we didn't rely on people to help us come up with their own solutions. And for me, that was a pretty mind-blowing concept, but it bore itself out over and over and over and over again. And we did a lot. We tutored a lot of people. I made 42 Facebook friends, and pretty much all of them at some point or another will send me a message, and usually the message is just something like hi or hello or how are you doing? And these were the kids that we tutored. These were the migrant workers in Doha that we tutored. And I think that the most special thing that we were able to do was liberate some people. One of the things that I found really interesting about being in India, and this is not a distinctly Indian problem, but this is where I engaged it, is that there was just some of the people that we met and some of the people that we interacted with and some of the people that we really came to love had this sort of deep pain because of this sort of psychological imprisonment from being told that they weren't expected to become anything. When we told Akash and Surge that they, had essentially gotten scholarships and they were going to go to college, Akash especially walked around just for 3 days, and it was almost like he hadn't even really reacted to the news, and he would say, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this." It was almost like at certain points they would try to wiggle out of it because it was such a shock to be told, for the first time in your life, you can go to college, you can become a civil engineer, here's the world, go for it. But I think that this semester, empowered us as much as it empowered everyone else by teaching us that you can literally go out into the world and look at a problem and decide that you want to do something about that. And that's not something that we're used to. You know, we're used to liking things on Facebook. We're used to signing petitions online. But the days of real physical, I want to go out there and change the world is in danger. And I think that semesters like this are helping to sort of bring that back.
Thank you. Can we give a round of applause to students? So at this point, we'd like to open it up for questions, for ideas, for suggestions. Yeah, Tim and then Carolyn. Yeah.
I guess this is a question maybe for you and Emily, because I put probably a lot of time into planning this ahead of time. But you did so much. How do you avoid the, if it's Tuesday, this must be Delhi feeling of, how do you keep a thematic idea going over that length of time?
That's a really good question. I can start and then you can jump in too. I think actually one of the things that helped us all from becoming bogged down in any one particular kind of thing was that we kept moving forward. All of our readings that we assigned and all of the things that we were discussing, we tried to make integrated with where we were, kind of geographically, with the history of the place. And I think that gave us kind of, it made things a little more exciting, it made things feel a little more compelling in that way. But I think the other thing that was nice is that we were in each place for only a piece of the semester, and so we couldn't really ever kind of rest on our laurels. We always had this sense that, okay, we only have 3 more weeks to do this project that we just started with the women, and we don't want to let them down. And so, I think that kind of kept the wind at our backs and kept pushing us.
And if anything, that then became itself a tremendous challenge because we didn't want to burn out. And the Bajaj Foundation, I always tell people it's the absolute perfect partner because they dream really big, and then 5 minutes later they say, okay, how are we going to do this? So they combine tremendous ambition with a lot of practical benefit, and that to me is ideal until they call you up on Saturday night at 10 and say, we'd like to pick you up tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And I say, well, wait a minute. And the students haven't had a break in the last 2 weeks, and Sunday was our day off. And so there had to be some pushback there too, because our local partners really invested in the connection and then wanted to work us all to the bone. And meanwhile, Emily and I were mean and kept assigning readings and writings. And so, these poor students were working full time for these nonprofits while also working full time for us. So that was a real challenge. And I think the only answer we came up with is to just keep fighting back and trying whenever we can to protect their weekends, protect some time off, to give them some downtime so that it wasn't all work. Yeah. Yeah, Karen.
I'm going to ask the students to tell us about your semester-long research project and how that experience was shaped by that context of doing the research as compared to being here in the classroom, in the library, on the internet, in your dorm, whatever.
Sure.
So I was interested in, well, this is now part of my undergraduate thesis, but I was interested in whether the identity of millennials within the United States, kind of the idea of progressive politics, civic engagement, use of technology, relatively egalitarian structures could be kind of transferred to other cultures, other young populations around the world. And so I had at my disposal a handful of young students in Qatar, and I figured I would meet plenty of young people along the way in India. And I definitely think my research especially was shaped by being in the field, because my idea was that there would be some sort of universal millennial identity. What I found, at least in India, was that a lot of things trump age in India, and especially caste politics, things like that. And so I actually got the opportunity to meet with an LGBT advocacy group in Chennai. And in most parts in India, sodomy laws are still on the books, and so this was kind of this advocacy group is kind of on the forefront of kind of human rights. And so their conversation really shaped where my research went. So being in the field was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I was interested in the place of art and the humanities in India's education system, more specifically kind of the effects of the rote government schools on these children's perception of its place, also how it would benefit them in the long run. And so I think that one of the things that I did as part of my research was I did poetry workshops with the Avanti Fellows. That was my project. So I had the students write about a challenge in their life and kind of explore it through poetry, and then interviewed them later on their opinions of the class, the way in which they see this as a vehicle through which to express themselves. And I think that comparing it to doing research here, it was probably the most fulfilling and the most difficult thing to do, because in a lot of ways here we're expected to just use text, and that's relatively we're talented students. It's something we're relatively able to do, and having to go out there and schedule interviews with people in the community, hear that they can't meet with you or that they don't respond back to you, and dealing with the real life challenges of doing research in a field and on the ground. I definitely it was hard, but really fulfilling, especially getting to hear back from students and people in the community.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I was studying, I was really interested in radio in particular, but just sort of like grassroots media usage and advocacy that goes on in India. And so it's a pretty broad topic, but the cool thing that happened was that we had this great network of people and resources to draw from, and so I would just mention it to someone. They'd be like, "Oh, well, have you seen this website or heard of this organization?" Or, "Oh, I know this person. You can talk to them." So it was that really helped with getting to set things up and getting to talk to people. And I, like Daniel, I got to meet with in Chennai a leader of a media, just a general advocacy group. And his group, they publish posters and all this just sort of literature for people to read about. I was also particularly interested in the Right to Information Act, which was passed in 2005 in India, which pretty much allows any Indian citizen to submit a request for information to the government about anything. So it's pretty new and pretty controversial, and there's a lot of pushback and a lot of interesting things going on right now. So getting to meet with the leader of that group was fabulous, and also something that Lexi mentioned was great was in our workshops with the Avanti Fellows, we sort of incorporated our research and our personal interest into a lesson that we taught to them. So I'm really interested in photography, so I pretty much did a little presentation about media and how photographs are used to explain things or tell stories, or so. So that was a really fun day, was to get to teach a lesson on that, and that was sort of my experience.
So for my research, I was really interested in fairness as a commodity, and by fairness I don't mean is this fair or not. I'm actually referring to the color of skin. So in India, there are a lot of subtle and overt ways that people sort of learn that having fairer skin is better than having there are different categories. One is dusky, which is kind of like the middle, and then dark skin. And what I did for my research project primarily was that I studied the effect on this of some younger children, and a lot of them, mostly girls, because this is primarily directed at women. And I was really interested in understanding this industry, and I kind of went in thinking I knew what there was to know about it, but there were a couple of things that surprised me. The first thing that surprised me was that of the 6 brands that I could find, all of them were owned by Unilever, who are the Dove Real Beauty Sketches people. Yeah.
Six.
6 brands of skin lightening creams and lotions. I'm sorry. They were all owned by Unilever, who are the Dove Real Beauty Sketches people. So if you guys saw that ad and you were really inspired by it, and it said, "Hey, women, you should love yourselves no matter who you are," that's not what they're doing over there. So it was just very interesting to see it made me almost guilty as an American to see this American company making so much money, and their ads, I mean, you can YouTube them. The biggest, most popular one is called Fair and Lovely. The thing that really struck me about it as I sort of dove more deeply into it was I was very interested in the impact of this on young girls. And what was really frustrating was that, India is a place where women are starting to really find their voice and find their power. And they're stepping outside of the home. They're going to work, they're sort of integrating themselves into the societies outside of their homes and their families. And if you looked at these ads earlier on, you would find that a lot of them had to do with things like marriageability. So a woman might not get the suitor she wanted, and then she might put on the cream and then he might like her, or she might not, get the boy that she wanted at school, and then she might put on the cream and then he might like her. But now, that trend is chasing women into the workplace. Now it's things like a woman wants to be an air hostess. She goes to get the job as the air hostess and she gets rejected. She comes home crying. Her mother hands her the cream. She puts on the cream. She goes back and she comes home and she's like, "I'm an air hostess now because I'm 4 shades lighter." So it was really difficult to see how diabolical these companies were in first telling women, okay, if being marriageable is important to you, you can't be marriageable unless you're using our product. And if, being marriageable is not as important to you and you want to go be a career woman, if you kind of want to transcend the idea that you're more than what you look like, well, that's going to follow you into the workplace too. And it teaches, and it's teaching these kids that instead of fighting that, instead of saying, okay, you're not going to give me a job because of my skin color, it teaches them to say, okay, that it's not my job to change a society that does that to me. It's my job to change myself to fit that society. And I would go into villages outside of Chennai where we were staying, because one of the great things about this program was we got to collaborate with the people that we could sort of bring in people from the other parts of the project. And when we went to the Visions Camp, we had 2 social workers with us, Regan and Satish. And I actually brought Satish on as my translator, and I never could have done any of this without him. We would go into these villages, and I would ask the children to draw themselves. And the girls especially, we broke up the crayons so that we had crayons that represented darker skin tones and crayons that represented lighter skin tones. We took the crayons that represented lighter skin tones out of the box, and we left all the crayons that represented dark skin tones in the box. So for every child there was at least one in every experiment we did, one crayon that would represent a darker skin tone. But for every child there was 1/4. So for every 4 children, we had one that represented a lighter skin tone. And what all the kids did, even though I think every single child that I interacted with for this study was darker than me, they all shared. They all waited for the crayon so that they could color themselves in with lighter skin. And that's kind of like the beginning part, but then I sort of went into the society and tried to figure out why these children felt so strongly and why they were doing that.
Thank you.
Other questions or ideas? Yeah, Raja.
The theme obviously is learning by doing, and I'm also interested in the fact that it often is learning by doing mistakes. And it came up during the discussion of the various mistakes that the team as a whole, and particularly I'm interested in the students' perspective on that. Leaving the Doha side apart, which was the initial part, and I think mistakes may have happened there as they always do. I'm more curious about the types of mistakes that happened in Wardha and Chennai that you felt were learning moments and they added more value to the whole experience.
I can get. Oh, you have one already. Hold on. I have a story about Dan, which might get going, but it's a story about not really a mistake. I'm cheating, but about changing course, right? Recognizing that a particular course isn't the way to go. So Dan had, in part because it was connected to his research, had designed a particular workshop around leadership skills, and we had taught this workshop to a group of village volunteers. These are young people who are chosen by their village to serve as liaisons with the Bajaj Foundation. So Bajaj Foundation asked a group of, I don't know, around 50 or 60 of these young folks to come to the Gandhi's ashram for a day-long workshop, which Dan designed and then primarily led. We all helped, but he really took leadership of that particular workshop, and he did an amazing job with it. Well, it went so well, we thought, okay, next week we have all of these leaders of women's collaboratives coming. So, in addition to giving them training in computers and English, we should do this same leadership workshop. Dan did it so well, he'll lead it again. So, okay, day comes of it. We're going to have the workshop. And then, I don't remember whose idea it was, but we realized, okay, we have a room full of probably about 200 women. There's a big group of women, right? Many of whom are not usually allowed to leave their homes or even their villages. And here they are all in this room together. It just, it didn't seem right to not have a conversation with them about their identity as women. So we start to have this conversation with them about their identity as women, and it becomes very clear that it's an incredibly meaningful experience for them to have that conversation. And it just seemed strange then, given that we had many young women in our group, for Dan to go up and teach them about leadership. It seemed to be more fitting to have a young woman go and do that. But it was Dan who decided to step aside and ask some of the young women in the group to then take over that workshop, which, again, I see not really as a mistake, but as recognizing that, okay, our plan wasn't going to work, time to go to plan B. Okay, your turn.
Yeah, I definitely think that, mistakes isn't always the best way to phrase it, but that there's only so much planning that you can do. We would plan these workshops, these outings, and a lot of times, even the best laid plans, as soon as, the first minute starts, it all unravels, entirely. They're not getting it, maybe we assume that they know what a keyboard looks like, and then they have no idea what it looks like. So I think it was more about being okay with a high degree of unpredictability, and then adapting really, really quickly, because something would happen like that, and we get together and be like, well, we have to go back to square one, who can do that? And being adaptable, even though all that planning was a huge failure, because we didn't account for X variable, or we didn't think that at some point we'd have to take a break for food, or it was going to be 100 degrees, or all sorts of variables that really throw a wrench in your plans. I think we did a really good job of taking a step back and saying, that's okay, what's our objective here, how do we move forward?
Yeah, I think you said it wonderfully. I think that I agree, they're not necessarily mistakes, they're just calls for us to be more flexible individuals. I think that the majority of it, at least in my opinion, came when it came for us teaching stuff. I think that we would spend hours doing lesson plans and making this curricula for a workshop, and then not use any of it, which in some parts made it feel wow, what did I do that for? But at the same time, you kind of see the reactions to these women learning, or to the children feeling empowered or doing something, and it's really not a mistake anymore.
Yeah, I think you guys said it really well. We kind of just had to become better at sort of planning, but also being well, we actually don't know how that might work out. So just the adaptability, I think, was something that we really, as a skill that as a group we had to learn, and we would sort of help each other out through that.
Can I add one more thing too? Is that sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it helps a lot when you have two professors who really keep the lines of communication open. We had these weekly journals that we would write to both professors, And, you know, so if you were having a bad day, that was okay. Like, I know they both got they got some bad day journals from me. And it was nice to be able to do that because it prevents you from, you know, losing energy. And I think sometimes the mistakes that we make or the things that we don't do as well as we want to do just come from being homesick or being upset or making a bigger deal out of something that needs to be. But when you have people to talk to, it dramatically lessens the possibility of that happening.
I was just going to add that kind of on the same theme of adaptability and, you know, only being able to plan for so much, that one of the things that I noticed right away was what an incredible group of overachievers we had. You know, all of us, I think, you know, are perfectionists in this group, right? In various ways. And so I think that was one of our biggest challenges, was, you know, going into working with our various partners with only so much information, and also just having so much learning going on beyond the service work. So, you know, having traveled a really, you know, long way from home, working with people for whom English is their third or fourth language, you know, there were just a lot of different kinds of hurdles that, you know, came into our way, like you said, Dan, that, you know, we couldn't account for. But that was one of the things that I think was one of the most pleasant surprises, and that I think ended up being really one of the most empowering things for the students, as I saw it, was that they were able to let go somewhat of the plans and of, you know, the ideal to work towards something better for the people that we were working with, right? And I think that's something that as a teacher, I know I am still learning, you know, but you really have to do that. You can't go in with your own vision of how something needs to be and go through it. You're going to bore people, or it's not going to reach anybody, it's not going to be useful. And so I think our students learned to be actually very good teachers in our time there, and, you know, hopefully they'll be able to carry that forward as well.
Other questions? Yeah, John, and then right here. Yeah.
First of all, I want to congratulate everybody. I'm extremely impressed by your presentation and just your thoughtful reflections on it. And in fact, so impressed, I'm going to ask you a tough question that I wasn't going to ask initially. But I just didn't want to perceive as being unfriendly. But have you reflected on what's the relationship between what could be characterized as sort of charitable acts and social change?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that we definitely wrestled with Suraj and Akash. Like, because what could we, I mean, I think that situation definitely brought that question to the forefront of our minds, and that was something that we sort of would talk about with readings and stuff, or like our class time. But like when we were like trying to figure out what can we do for these two guys that were just so awesome, that question, we talked about that a lot. And yeah, I think it's just you want to do something that like you can sort of help provide, but it's more like facilitate, you know, because like having the Bajaj mentors with them on the ground, you know, if they have questions or concerns or like something is going on, like right then they have someone to, like, there's someone to talk to. But just I don't know, I guess being able to sort of put something in motion, but then have it run on its own and just sort of, you know, help out with it. You know what I mean?
I definitely think that there's a tendency for service trips to be kind of a vacation with impact. You go somewhere, you have a tangible thing, you build a house, you build something. And I didn't really feel like we were doing that. I think we really tried really hard to move away from those kind of charitable acts where you have something really tangible. And I think a lot of people in our group struggled with walking away from Wardo, walking away from Chennai without having this very tangible house to look at. But instead, I think we spent the entire semester just planting a lot of trees. And so you kind of see a little bit of sprouts with this development lab, with Akash and Suraj with their education. And I think we really were geared towards putting very, like, you know, moving that Titanic, which I think is what social change is. There are radical elements, but I don't think I was the radical element in India. I think I was just one of the many drops. And I thought that those tiny drops that I was doing mattered, and those seeds that I was planting mattered. And so I think we really tried to stay away from the tangible good and leaving that tangible good instead of, just moving that Titanic as small as it was.
I think with charity, there's this notion of someone better off giving something to someone who isn't. And I don't think that in any way we gave things. I think that we worked incredibly hard and they worked incredibly hard, and we were able to learn on both sides, which is why I don't think I took away a charitable act. Like Akash and Surge they're getting these funds, but they're working hard to better themselves, and that's the part that I think is the distinction between social change. We're mobilizing people to, do better or, dream bigger. The kids in our classes were there because they wanted to be. No one made them come. It was optional. And I think that sort of facilitating change is the way that I saw it.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think a really cool thing about charitable acts, but first I think you have to define what a charitable act is, because there are some people who say, sending $30 a month to some places is a charitable act, and I mean it is, but I think when you're meeting people and you're talking to people and you're learning their stories and you're talking about their childhood, you're invested in them in a way that you kind of can't be from far away. Akash and especially Akash talks to us all the time. And so it's one thing to say, okay, here's this money, you're going to go to college. But what happens when he gets to college, and just like everyone in this room, he needs some moral support? I think that's kind of like where the social change comes in, is that not only do we want to help, but we're kind of empowered with the awareness to help. We kind of know, okay, Akash needs someone to tell him he can do it today. Akash needs someone to tell him not to be scared of this class, to tell him that he can finish his computer training. And I think that that's something that consistently gets underestimated when we talk about, changing the world or making things better, is just empowering people psychologically and emotionally to do that. And I think that that's what experiences like this give us the tools to do.
Yeah.
First, I just want to comment, you make me wish I could be a student again, because your stories are so great. It sounds like such a wonderful experience. But can you tell me how this has changed your thoughts about your plans for the future?
Sure. I am, and I've said this to both Professor Slates, that I am just so grateful to have done this. I think that for me, it made me, I always knew that I wanted to do something internationally. I mean, I'm a global studies major. It's what I studied. It's what I enjoyed reading about. And this idea of, international education development was something that we really kind of took by storm. Everything we did was focused on education development. And I had never had the opportunity to teach before. I had never, had the opportunity to be abroad. And so bringing all those things together, for me at least, has led me to not only want to pursue international education development, but also, possibly going into teaching or, doing a Fulbright in India and going back. I mean, I, for one, am incredibly desperate to go back. It shaped the way that I came back in this semester. I feel like I have a lot more direction. I picked classes probably the most strategic way I ever had, and enjoy them, and am, kind of streamlining the way that I'm going about my education.
Yeah.
So I've spent some time in Malawi, which is in Southeast Africa. I spent a full summer there and then returned for a week during my freshman year. So I've had some experience in community development and things like that. And then, I spent the last semester in India working on these service projects. And I think both times I came back to the U.S. more committed to finding communities of need here. And so I think at some point when we were at the ashram, I had a conversation with Nico saying, I think I want to go to law school. I think that's what I want to do. And I kind of constantly flirt between these two different paths of international development and foreign policy, and then U.S. politics and public office. And at some point, while I was in India, I said, I'm pretty sure I want to go back home, I want to find a community, I want to become part of it, and I want to change it dramatically. And I think every time I go abroad, I find community, I somehow am pulled harder back to home. And so I think that's what the trip did to me.
For me, I think just the variety of experiences that we had, and just the ways in, like, all the ways in which you can, changing the world is like this huge idea. It's like, we talk about it all the time, but like, it's these like interpersonal interactions, it's teaching, it's, agriculture, it's, so I pretty much just learned that no matter what I choose, like from this trip, I like know what it's like to do fulfilling work and to like be excited about what you're doing that day. And I think just getting to experience that and to sort of, chase that in what I do in the future is sort of what I took from it.
I guess what I took from it with regard to the future is that kind of like in the middle of the semester, I sort of asked myself this question, like what kind of person am I going to grow up to be in the context of all of these things that I'm seeing right now? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think sort of like where I'm sitting now is that I can grow up to pretty much be anyone and can pretty much grow up to do anything and still make a difference. There are all these questions that we ask ourselves, like, okay, let's say I go to law school. I'll be a better person if I study civil rights law as opposed to corporate law, right? And those are the questions that we kind of ask ourselves to basically figure out whether or not we can help other people. But one thing that I really learned from this semester to stop doing, and I suspect that a lot of other people do this too, is to go, okay, well, if I'm not all in, if I'm not, absolutely doing something completely revolutionary and changing the world, then I'm almost not good enough to try. And sort of what I learned from this semester is that even if I don't grow up and become, an ambassador or own my own NGO, I can still be whoever I am and find a cause and be committed to it and try to be a part of a solution.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, Emma.
So I could easily answer this question from my own perspective, but I'm curious to hear it from yours. That a huge problem at this campus is not having an appreciation for concepts of social change, and I couldn't help but notice that 3 of you are global studies majors, as am I, and Dan is IRP. What do you say is so poignantly special and vital about what you've learned that could apply to all Carnegie Mellon students from different enterprises to help kind of fill that void in CIT or CS or MCS, so to speak?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I think a huge part of it is that people, and in my discipline, you're constantly thinking about movement and about change and about progress or devolution. But I think in other disciplines, when it's about, how does oxygen, mold with another molecule, and you get stuck in that. And I think the easiest way to do that is to break people out of that mold, is to show them how what they care so much about can impact, the world in other ways. So like the 2, chemistry students who are studying cow dung, they're taking something that's normally very confined to scientific textbooks and contextualizing it in rural India. And so I think it's just showing examples of how what they study can matter. Because what I'm studying is always about what matters, what's the impact. And I think some of the other studies are so far pulled away from that. And I think just exposing them to, what you're learning can make a huge impact. Not just, on the next pharmaceutical drug, but on the next biofuel, design.
One of the questions for me and I think it's a question for all of us, is how we can make such a semester more accessible to students that have more specific requirements that couldn't be satisfied with the kinds of courses we were able to offer. So all of the courses we offered were within the history department, which worked very well for the students that came on the semester, but wouldn't work as well for students in CIT that have certain requirements they have to fulfill. So that's a question for the future. How can we make it more accessible to students throughout the university for the whole semester? Now, the one thing that worked really well is having the CMUQ students come during their spring break. Those students that came were predominantly business or information systems students who have quite a lot of requirements to fulfill and might have had a hard time coming for the whole semester, but were able to come for their spring break and then brought their backgrounds with them and brought all the skill sets they have with them. So ideally, we would be able to open this kind of experience to all Carnegie Mellon students. Perhaps for some it'll be a semester-long experience, perhaps for others it'll be a spring break experience that then partners up with other students who were there.
I think, well, for starters, I think CMU can really do a number on self-esteem. And I've actually talked to a lot of people about this program. Most of my friends are CS and CIT and MCS. Not sure how it happened, but it did. And a lot of them were really interested in it. They're like, that's so cool. I wish I could have gone. And just like Nico said, part of it was just about the classes that they had set up. But I think another part of it is that when we go as global studies majors, as IRP, we're primarily there to think. We're primarily there to interact with people. We're primarily there to sort of leave our ideas and try to create systematic change. But we can't make dams or bridges or any of those things. And I think part of the problem is, and we have this also, is that when you go, you want to complete something, and I think what I hear from a lot of people is like, if I go, I want to build the whole bridge, When I leave, I want there to be a bridge there when I'm done, or I want there to be a new dam, or I want there to be a new something. And I think a big thing that we have to do for, our brothers and sisters in CIT and MCS is we have to make them comfortable with being a part of something larger, being a part of something that continues, because everything for them is so project-oriented. It's like there's a start time and an end time, and you begin it and then it's finished. But for some of these, like there's stuff that we started that we will all graduate and probably never see it reach its peak. And that's going to be a little bit easier for people who are ideas-based as opposed to people who do physical things.
Well, I'll just add one thing, I know we have to wrap up. One of the things we had to grapple with very quickly was the limitations of our own knowledge and expertise, kind of faced with the questions and issues that our partners on the ground needed help with. We had one student, Molly Burnson, who was a biology major, who was very interested in agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and so she was able to connect very quickly to Bajaj Foundation projects that were already happening. But we had to have a lot of discussions about, how do we overcome our own frustration and our limitations, first of all, and kind of let that go, and then how do we maximize our own gifts and interests, and do the most that we can with those while we're here. And then very quickly we realized we were going to have to leave in a few weeks, and so we had to trust that our partners on the ground were going to continue this amazing work, and that we were just kind of in a relay, holding the baton for a few weeks and then passing it on. And I think this is one of the reasons that we wanted to start the Bajaj Rural Development Lab, so that we could bring in the larger CMU community, students and faculty and staff, so that we can leverage all of our strengths and interests. And so I think that was kind of an important outcome that we didn't expect going into the semester.
Beautifully said.
It's an excellent question.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you all again for coming, and let's give the students a round of applause. Thank you all.